audio sounded so big and huge in the 60s, like lots of reverb, lots of room sound. That's generally because the places they were recording were so big to accommodate a full orchestra, to accommodate a whole bleachers rows of people watching Frank Sinatra perform, to accommodate like celebrities to do that, and the orchestra and the band. And these places were later torn down to create parking lots. And then when you did that, what happened? The studios got tighter, smaller. Then you get sounds of the 70s, very tight sounding drums, tight sounding everything, small rooms, like a drum booth style recording was invented. Different, elements like this start coming into play, close mic'd stuff. Then you get the 80s, which is a large, a part of the time period where you have this very unnatural sounding reverb and very digital delayed reverb sound. And to be honest, a lot of the 80s hits me in a way that I cannot fully appreciate it because I am so opposed to that sound. It's this like visceral reaction I've always had towards a lot of 80s music because of the tones they're using. Just sounds so fake to me. Like where I hear the 70s sounds I love, the 60s sounds I love, the 90s sounds I love, because there's a realness to it. And then in the 80s, you're getting this really fake sounding stuff that at the time must have been groundbreaking and everybody loved it. But I can't stand a lot of it. So sometimes, like production wise, when people go to get there and emulate stuff like that, it can work in today's world sometimes. And sometimes back then there'd be stuff I'd listen to where I'd be like, wow, that's cool. I dig it. Like there's some Prince stuff went against the grain on this where they'd use some of those sounds, but it would still be so cool. So I love Prince. I love David Bowie too, but some of the stuff, like the sounds within some of the stuff that was done, it's like depending on the era of Bowie, depends on whether I like it or not, just because of the sounds that were being used. And some of them just rub me the wrong way. I can't explain it any other way. That gated reverb, like snare sound, roughs me up. But I could still listen to, Phil Collins' Genesis, like No Son of Mine, one of his amazing song. There's so many things out there I can listen to, but there's so many things from the 80s decade that I don't really like connect with. And then when you get we got 60s huge sounds, 70s tight sounds, 80s this fake big sound. It's a fake large, fake big, and very saturated over distorted guitars. In my opinion, a lot of 80s stuff sounds very tight, small, and thin because everything's distorted. Because everything's so distorted, nothing sounds good to me. Whereas when you listen to like the Zeppelin stuff, everything is like on the verge of breaking up, but it's way less distorted than you think. And a lot of times, or not, maybe not a lot of times, but like on Black Dog, some of those amazing guitar tones, Jimmy Page is running directly through the console, into like a 1073 style preamp that's gained out like, crazy to create some distortion, but it's driving it in a way that's, in my opinion, more pleasing to the ear than a super, like metal type of tone. So like once you get into that 80s, everything hugely distorted with a little slap delay on everything, it's like, I don't even like that. It's just my personal taste. I can't stand it. Whereas that realness that applies when you just break up the preamp with Les Paul breaking up a preamp, it sounds amazing. So to me, there's like, okay, there's different elements. And of course, there's also, amps being mic'd, real amps. And what I want you to realize is all that stuff's less distorted than you think. It's all way less distorted than you think. I look at it like, when you think camera adds 10 pounds or whatever the rule is, 15, 20, I don't even know what the rule is. But the point is, whatever that is, it's the same for distortion. If you put too much distortion on anything, it's going to get to a place where now when you're listening back on your speakers, it's not going to sound good. So even if it sounds good in the room where you think you like your tone, back off on the distortion. It'll always sound better on a recording. Back off a little bit. I look at this a lot. It's a huge tip. As soon as you start doing that, you're actually get the clarity from the instruments that you're looking for, because in the room it sounds way different than when it's recorded through the monitors, and like that's how it lives on the record. You'll notice the distortion way more, and it will sound thinner and smaller. So another thing, we as humans, for whatever reason, we like distortion. It gives us excitement. And I remember Chad Blake talking about this. It might have been in that hearing panel discussion. What he mentions is when he adds a little bit of distortion, it perks him up. It brings his interest to it brings his interest to attention. And even if it's only a little bit buried under it, that little bit makes a difference. So by adding a little bit of distortion in parallel, by blending in some saturation, you will bring attention to things, because we as humans, there's only certain things that we've been exposed to that distort. And they're usually dangerous things, like a lion's roar, for example, distorts if you're near it, and that thing is loud. How many lions have I been near? None. Not relevant. Point is, you heard the freaking thing on, when the beginning of The Wizard of Oz or any of those things, that lion starts rolling. It's a distorted sound because it's loud, because it's meant to scare us. It's meant to make us aware and afraid. There's something to that. As soon as you give it a little bit of that grit, you can get to a point where now you're all of a sudden calling attention to it. Now everyone's interested. Now their attention's peaked. This is what I dig. I dig this. So I'm going to do this on a lot of things, especially stuff like bass. Bass sounds very, a clean bass sounds okay, but a bass with a little distortion and it will come out of the speakers and it'll bring out the clarity in what's happening within mid-range. So there's reasons why people are doing that. I want you to know that. It's to touch on the human element of, when the thunder hits and it's, close to you, that crackling and how loud that is, that's distorted a little bit. And that makes us notice it, is what it does. And we're used to that. We're used to this in all senses. We're used to it, especially in music. So as soon as we hear something that sounds a little bit distorted, we're all going to listen. So this is why distortion plays such a huge role. It's also why when you listen to the old school recordings, they mean a lot, because those tape machines weren't always calibrated correctly. And because of that, you may get more low-end thump out of it and a little bit of distortion. You may get an overmodulated top end that's exciting because it's a little bit distorted, a little bit, not correctly calibrated, whatever that means. Throughout time, everything correct had to be figured out, like, hey, you don't need to do it that way in order to get excitement. And people were like, oh, it could be done this way and it's more exciting. Yeah. So that the concept of one way doesn't make any sense. The concept of always this way doesn't make any sense. You got to experiment. You got to be trying stuff. But I just wanted you guys to see how it flips back and forth. You got 80s super verb, you got 90s tight again, everything super tight. Then you get the 2000 era where it's super produced sounds. Everybody's, focused into 2000, 2001, 2002. Picture like, I don't know, a lot of bands come to mind in that era, but they're super produced sounding to my ear compared to 90s, right? Then what happens? There's this underground Brooklyn style rebellion. I'm from the New York area. So when I think of 2004 to 7-ish era, you got the juxtaposition of the Chili Peppers doing Stadium Arcadium combined with things like Animal Collective coming out around 2004, with Sung Tongs. You got Grizzly Bear coming out around shortly after that with these very reverb sounding, like indie style, like underproduced kind of sounds that sound amazing and huge and big, combined with that tightness of and super produced nature of like the Chili Peppers. So what I'm saying is it's all kind of at the same time, but it's a juxtaposition of all this stuff that actually is the catalyst for it. It's what creates it. And it wasn't unlike that how the 80s with all that hair metal and stuff produced the grunge 90s. It's all, in one gets to the other, gets to the other. So in order to get ahead of the curve, the goal in my mind is to understand it all. To understand it all means you will use techniques and ways to produce things that you didn't think you should use because you may consider them dated. Guess what? Dated is going to be the future. It's how it works, moves in cycles. So if you think about it like this, then you can look at something like Dilla Time and what that was and what that means and how that changed the way beats sound forever and how it really improved them. And you could apply it to other things. Maybe when you're recording beats or whatever, maybe you won't focus on one instrument at a time because that's not what was done back in the day. What they used to do was play all in a room without headphones, so that band had to mix themselves. If you could apply this to your beats, you may come up with something that's really out there and really cool. If you got a bunch of guys who play, put them all together. Have them play at once. I don't care what style of music they're doing. But the point is, playing together, start with the click in your ear and then cut it out. Take it out. Don't leave the click in the whole time. Let that human groove, that ebb and flow happen. It will create a similar effect, like a dilettante thing, but across the whole beat, not just the drums. Things like this, I think the world is getting ready for, if we're not there already. You should be experimenting every single day with what you're doing and not getting locked into this is how I do things. As soon as you get locked into this is how I do things, you might as well pack it up and go to the beach, because all you're doing is creating an assembly line for your music at that point. You're taking all of what it could be out of it. And if you're meant to do this, in my opinion, your goal is to try to change the world with what you're making, to try to make people have a different life experience because they heard your song. At least that's what I'm trying to do, and I think that's what people who really are meant to do this are trying to do with every single song they create. And if that's the case, then you are a part of the history just as much as you're a part of the now and the future. You need to have that history in order to know what you can do, what are possibilities, to be able to step out of what is happening, all right? Because just like back then, when Frank Sinatra is recording, it was a very good year. He's doing it live in the room with an orchestra behind him and a room full of people, celebrities watching him. Mark Rubel talks about this. This is the kind of thing where everybody has to be listening and focused on the point, and the room is playing a part in the sound, which means your specific studio, even if it's a house or a bedroom or a living room or a dining room, that can all play a part in your sound, in making you unique and what you're doing unique. So use it. You might as well use it. Don't keep doing what everybody's doing. Don't put the click track on, headphones on, record one instrument at a time. That's been done. It's been done. How many more times are we going to do that? Get outside of that. I'm trying to get you to get outside yourself and really reach for the next level. That's all I'm trying to do. If I can get any one of you to do that, I've done my job. So bottom line, I think this is what you should be thinking. You should be honestly every day, what can I do different than I did the day before? That's what you should be doing. Because if you become relentless enough in that respect, it's going to be impossible not to notice you. Impossible to ignore what you're doing. It's actually a Steve Martin thing that he said. He said, when people ask him what they should do to become, to get there, his advice is always be undeniable. Then they have to come to you. Then you don't need to go out and do your networking, whatever. Be undeniable in what you do. Don't just think you're great. Be great and be doing more than everyone else. Become undeniable. That's how you get there. So I'm going to leave you with that. If you dug this, do me a favor, throw it in the comments section. If you liked it, hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. My name's Evan Jaffe. This is Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.